In this video we're going to be having a look at what are some of the main aims of supply side policies. So there's basically four key aims of supply side policies that we were looking at in this video. The first one is that they aim to fight stagflation. So only supply side policies are useful during stagflation. We can't use things like lower interest rates because they're going to lead to more inflation in the economy. We're better off using things that are going to boost our productive capacity and boost productivity. We're also less likely to use things like lower income taxes because they're going to lead to higher aggregate demand, even though they might have some supply side benefits. So when we're experiencing stagflation, we're going to be looking at things to try and boost the education, boost the skill level of the workforce, try and increase our participation rates so that we can increase our supply of goods and services without causing inflationary pressures. So that's when we're also going to be looking at things like immigration, labour market deregulation so that we can increase competition in the market, trade liberalisation, anything that's going to try and boost our productivity and try and make us more competitive. So only aggregate supply side policies are useful during stagflation. Budgetary policies that are focused on demand and monetary policy are likely to be ineffective. Another thing that we'll use aggregate supply side policies are to alleviate capacity constraints. So stagflation is directly related to high inflation and weak growth. We often experience capacity constraints when we experience periods of high growth and high aggregate demand. So it's all about trying to boost aggregate supply to meet that aggregate demand. So that can be done via trying to eliminate skill shortages by immigrating. So that would be a good way to alleviate capacity constraints, or high capacity utilisation. Infrastructure to try and reduce road congestion and improving infrastructure at ports and facilities like that, so that we don't have capacity constraints. Capacity constraints, another word for capacity constraints is like bottlenecks in production, which basically make it hard for us to provide any more supply to meet that extra aggregate demand. That's what a capacity constraint is. That's what capacity utilisation means. It's important that you don't use the term like trying to boost participation to try and increase capacity utilisation. That's not what the word is. We're not trying to increase capacity utilisation. We're trying to increase our productive capacity to reduce capacity utilisation. So we're not at our physical limit anymore because we have more natural and capital and labour resources. So things like increasing participation and immigration are not ways to try and increase capacity utilisation. They are ways to try and increase our productive capacity and make sure that our capacity utilisation stays in that zone where we're on the bend at around the 75 to 80%. Not 90-95% capacity utilisation, because that means we're experiencing capacity constraints. That's when we need to invest on the supply side of our economy. That's when we need to focus on boosting productivity, finding more access to resources, reducing road congestion and things like that. Supply side policies can also address short-term supply shocks. So for example, if there's droughts and natural disasters, we can give tax concessions for farmers to make them to lower their cost of production and make them more competitive, subsidies to businesses to increase investment. So if we have a one-off spike in oil prices, the government might reduce excise taxes to reduce firms' cost of production. So sometimes they will use supply-side policies to address supply-side shocks, to encourage investment, to reduce prices and get us back to normal. And finally, supply-side policies are used to boost productivity and international competitiveness. So whenever we're looking at our international competitiveness, we're focusing on price and quality of goods and services, and that can be improved by microeconomic reforms. So trade liberalisation will try and make us more competitive because we have more competition from overseas. Labour market reforms, so things like deregulating the labour market. It also includes like enterprise bargaining and productivity-based pay, work contracts, removing unfair dismissal laws, all things that are going to try and encourage people to be more productive in the workforce. Competition is really important because without competition, yes, we might be able to increase productivity and make higher profits, but without competition, we're not going to be able to pass on those. Businesses will often not pass on that increased profit from being more productive in the form of reduced prices. So productivity is likely to improve competitiveness, but an increase in competition is necessary to provide businesses with the biggest incentive to reduce prices. So without competition, there's less incentive to be productive, but there's also less incentive to reduce prices. Without competition, it can often lead to businesses being more productive but not passing on those prices. So for example, a good example would that be, let's say firms use enterprise bargaining to make their workers more productive. That might help to lower their cost of production, but if they don't have a high level of competition as well, they may not pass on those lower prices to us in the form of lower prices. So it's important to have not only reforms in place to boost productivity, but also to have increased competition so that we can make the most of that increased productivity in the form of lower prices. Next video, we're going to have a look at the difference between productivity and efficiency.